And I was, at the time when I wrote that bio, I figured I might be reading from the Institute of Loafing, one of my other projects, but I've decided to instead read from this another project called Radio Ethiopia with the subtitle New Flower. New Flower is the translation of Addis Ababa. As a kid I lived in from 9 to 14 in Addis, and I've been trying to write this for most of my adult life. And there's some stuff that I've included in the table in the back, including my book about Ethiopia, which I wrote, transcribed when I was a kid. It's also explained in this, so I won't say too much more. Other than that, this is what I consider to be a hybrid text, a cross between memoir, essay, quotation, just a series of quotations in the works, in the series, and poems. It was inspired by Claudine Rankin's Citizen, a lyric. Suddenly I had a moment of inspiration in the shower and figured, okay, I know how to write, I know how to begin this damn project. So here goes. Radio Ethiopia, New Flower. Quote, how I came to Ethiopia. First, we started from Caliph and flew to New York at the night. Then at 10:15 in the night, we flew to Rome. Then we went to Greece and to Ethiopia. The main objectives of the contract were to, 1, conduct a broad economic analysis of the agricultural sector, 2, help plan for a structural shift toward income-producing activities in the agricultural sector, 3, select at least 6 potential agro-industrial projects, and 4, prepare implementation plans for these selected projects. The mission essentially asked, where can we put our chips? PDF USA.gov. Radio Spicer. And this is a quote from Jack Spicer. And you have to go into a serial poem not knowing what the hell you're doing. That's the first thing. You have to be tricked into it. It has to be some path that you've never seen on a map before, and so forth, end quote. How I came to Ethiopia is from my book about Ethiopia, which as a 4th grade class project, I assembled in my Amharic language class that was taught by a tall Ethiopian man at the American Community School in Addis Ababa in 1967, dressed in a black suit. Some of the words in the notebook may be my own, but most of them were dictated by our teacher. What I remember of him was that he was tall, healthy looking, well-dressed, smart, and somewhat formal in manner. Although most of my book contains factual information, at a certain point the views of the speaker, our teacher, which flowed into the ears of his listeners, his students, then through their pencils onto sheets of paper, bleed through, in particular his sense of superiority over people from the eastern part of the country. Quote, the Danakils and the Somalis and the ISIS live in the desert on the east. There are Muslims and very fierce. These are kinky-haired, thick-lipped, flat-nosed, ebony black people. They are armed with knives and spears and like to fight and always ready to fight, end quote. Spelling errors are all mine. I was 9 at the time. Recently, at my parents' house in Fort Collins, I overheard my mother explaining to my niece's fiance that the Ethiopians tended to look down on darker Africans. Of course, I had heard this many times, if not from my mother, then someone else in the family, including myself, hearing myself now saying it then in the past, not so distant. It was a simple fact. I guess it somehow struck me as hopeful, like we're all in this happy bubble of prejudice and racism together. See, they do it too. But was it because I'm white? Ethiopia saved me from America. Thank you, New Flower. Because of Ethiopia, I didn't have to be American, then and now. Of course, when we are in Ethiopia, we are entirely American. In Ethiopia, we went to the American Community School, the only time America had anything to do with community in my lifetime. My adult lifetime started with Ronald Reagan, he and his ilk of the anti-community school. It's like I've been living my entire adult life under this dark American cloud. He owned a ranch, and he rode his horse on the ranch. And when he rode his horse on the ranch, he wore a cowboy hat. We had horses, but no ranch. I had a safari hat with a faux leopard skin hat band picked up on vacation in Nairobi, but no cowboy hat. We lived inside walls, our compound soundly safe. The horses, Nightmare and Pepper, were on the other side of the southern wall, in a field behind walls, like us, though theirs was barbed wire, while ours was made of stone from the quarry down the road, topped with shards of broken glass to gouge the knees of the poor, as Carolyn Forche might say. Unlike Nightmare and Pepper, we could come and go as we pleased, while they, being horses, could not go or come as they pleased. When later, living behind walls in West Berlin, that's also when I was totally American. Just as in England, I was American, and just as in Brazil, I was American. In Ost-Berlin, too, I was totally Amerikanisch, coming and freely going, laughing at the guards encased in their booths, stuck there. Being in the USA presently, and thus not an American, I can write Brazil as Brazil. During Carnival, my Brazilian friends used my status as an American to get us into the cool club in town. They said to the doorman that I was American and that this was my first carnival. And so he let us into the club, thanks to me and my country of origin. On the last night of Carnival, at the very end of it, the morning light lifting into the new day, everyone jumped in the swimming pool with their clothes on. Apparently, suicide rates increase after Carnival, the weight of another year of poverty overwhelming them, taking them down. But in the United States, because of Ethiopia, I didn't have to be American. When we first returned to the USA, moved to Fort Collins, Colorado, wide streets, narrow minds, my junior high school peers called me an African. I didn't know what that meant, and I suspect they didn't either. Africa's a continent, you know. In America, being an American, you have to point such stuff out. That I was totally white American mattered little to my white junior high school Amerikanish peers, who half the time wanted to kick the living daylights out of me, the African, yet they and me, totally white Americans, all and one. At first, I figured Radio Ethiopia would consist of a series of poems about my experiences in Addis Ababa, New Flower as the translation went. And in fact, I wrote a number of such poems about these experiences and submitted them to Breadloaf's Writers' Conference back in 1982, and so I got in fact, because of Ethiopia. I wedged my way into the conference by using Ethiopia as my wedge. I was told by my mentor not to expect to get accepted by Breadloaf Writers' Conference, as it was quite competitive, but with Ethiopia, it was a shoo-in, I learned later, as I had a wedge. William Matthews. I'd kill for that experience. Did he actually say that? Or did he say, as a poet, I envy that experience? Me thinking then that I was indeed sitting on some kind of gold mine, the contents of which would comprise my first book, the book that launched my career, a treasure trove there in the waiting. Quote, he chose your poem to workshop first, one of my peers saying. That's a sign. But then later, I happened upon Friedrich Nietzsche's aphorism, quote, poets behave shamelessly toward their experiences. They exploit them, end quote. And I couldn't erase it from my head. The aphorism stuck somewhere between an infinite loop and the eternal return. Decades later, Ethiopia remaining unwritten, I told Chris of my conundrum, how I'd overthought it and couldn't write it. I went through the whole history of it, the whole of it boiling down to the sense that in writing it, I was basically re-exploiting it, a colonizing gesture, 1 or 2 steps removed. And Chris said, write about that. Of course, you enter into it with good intentions, but being an American, with America right there behind you, intentions are beside the fact. Yes, but I didn't mean it that way. I didn't do that. Quote, this is from John Perkins' Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Claudine pulled no punches describing what I would be called upon to do. My job, she said, was, quote, to encourage world leaders to become part of a vast network that promotes U.S. commercial interests. In the end, those leaders became ensnared in a web of debt that ensures their loyalty. We can draw on them whenever we desire to satisfy our political, economic, or military needs. In turn, they bolster their political positions by bringing industrial parks, power plants, and airports to their people. The owners of U.S. engineering/construction companies become fabulously wealthy, end quote. I told Chris that I was concerned about how Ethiopia might affect my father, Radio Ethiopia, that is, a critique, inevitably, of his life's work, a rebuke to his narrative of sacrificing a lucrative career in the oil business for a career in what would turn out to be third world economic development, a kind of secular missionary of sorts, a pure gesture, selfless, beyond money. It was as if I was calling his entire life, his being itself, into question. And Chris said, write about that. How I came to Ethiopia too. This is a quote from the U.S. Army Area Handbook for Ethiopia, 2nd edition, June 24th, 1964. Quote, it occupies strategic territories in Northeast Africa and in the African continent, which is moving into an epoch of great ferment and revolutionary violence. It is a strong influence for moderation, largely because of the power of tradition amongst its people. The Amhara Tigray peoples, whose culture and political system dominate the country, have developed and preserved a sense of superiority, not only to subordinate peoples within the empire, but also to their African neighbors and outsiders generally. This quality of mind hinders the transformation of their traditionalist society. This condition of the Ethiopian peoples becomes more significant to the degree that they fail satisfactorily to meet their problems, and as a result, make a possible contribution to continental instability affecting world peace, end quote. Bullet point. Increase insufficient manpower by improving general education and training skills needed in the job market, and bullet point. Raise current inadequate government revenues by expanding the money sector of the economy through concentration on revenue-producing activities in agriculture and related industries. www.usa.gov. Recently, my father mentioned John Perkins' Confession of an Economic Hitman, speaking about it with disgust, saying that it didn't match his experience in the least. And I said that I had heard of the book, being in fact quite interested in what Perkins had to say, though I left that part out and acted innocent, as if I had only heard of it in passing. He then said that he had the book, and that I could take it and read it if I wanted to, then adding, grabbing the book from the shelf and pushing it my way, that I would probably agree with the author's account of things. Right about that, Chris said. Disgusted with the book and its author, just the idea that it was laying there in his library, in his office, such that he was relieved to evacuate it from his shelves, shoving it toward me across the table. Here, you take it, he said in disgust. You probably agree with him anyway. Quote, Crops and Livestock, from my book about Ethiopia. On the middle and southern plateau, the main crops are cotton, sugarcane, teff, wheat, and corn. In warmer regions, oranges, bananas, grapefruit, and lemons are grown. In the southwest, coffee is the main crop. Ethiopia has an estimated 25 million herd of cattle, 19 million sheep, 17 million goats, 1 million camels, 1 million horses, and 500,000 donkeys. This country ranks first in Africa in the number of cattle and goats, and second, sheep and hogs, end quote. Quote, this is from Alain Badiou on the American War against Iraq. For Americans, the world has no objective existence. It is only the stage of their interests, a disparate assortment of situations scrutinized according to threats or prospects they present to American comfort, long referred to as the American way of life or the American dream, i.e., what is presented to the whole world as a supreme goal that everyone must strive to realize, end quote. How are we doing?
17 minutes.
Thank you. I don't walk across the room as an American. It's like saying I'm not white, not a man, not an aging white one. Me and my body walk across the American room clad as a white man, in and out, head to toe, towing a line in that toe, thinking like an American, acting like an old white guy who shall not wear his trousers rolled, prefers not to be American, not to be white, to not be male, fat, or pink, but to keep the perks. 'Tis a privilege to write this, is it? Instead of laboring, for example, making the clothes your body hangs in, the air between skin and cloth, this fabric is flaking, sweating, wet. Entire lives wasted at work, entire generations wasted making the body white. My male white American hangs out in. Is privilege the right word? Was it Spicer who said something about the body being naked in its clothing? I like air between my lines. The air between these lines are like the privileged air that swirls through this room. Productivity, streaming live through the front windows, while in the backyard, the sliding door opens to a waist-high whistle, tossing in the breeze between the insects, some kind of flying menace. Trapped in this maze, the poet lost her mother and father in an automobile accident just a couple of weeks ago. The lives wasted laboring, laying waste. My sister, lost to us 2 months before, no longer in our rooms, an absence in our body that keeps moving. Quote, he wears the clothes wherein he walks naked, end quote. I wanted to like it, but don't think she remembers me. We, the lost, I wanted to say, a mere click away, but I hesitated, drew back. Well, I could stop there and read just a little bit more.
Read.
Okay. I'm easily persuaded.
You have 10 more minutes. Even
Okay,
more.
thank you. And then you learn that when people live abroad, we call it overseas, people come and go. And then you learn how there's an advantage to that. No one was there to live for good, but some were more temporary than others. We eventually became veterans, vets who watched others come and go, but none of us were there to stay. Sometimes friends leaving, sometimes enemies leaving, sometime a mistake leaving, other times a girl leaving, the girl you had a crush on leaving. She's not here anymore? I told her not too long before her death that when our youngest brother, Paul, died, I found myself thinking about poetry almost right away, thinking how I'd end up writing about it, it lending me as a poet a kind of gravitas, me thinking then to myself cynically at the time, thinking this as I walked up Lexington Avenue, disgusted, ashamed, towards Central Park, and then when later there in Central Park, looking up into the whirling sky, the sun blanched between the menacing clouds, the light briefly dim as it was, lighting up snowflakes that drifted, forlorn, up and down in the wind that scuttled the dead leaves across the pavement, all these details coming at me like a bad poem. When I first arrived in Rio, 5 years after Addis, a month or so before January, the plane in its descent, landing gear down, passing over the favelas, and that sudden recognition, memories of tin, the materiality of it, and the way it looks at you. Now, there, shacks at the oval window, looking down on them like I had just awoken from a dream, the dream of the USA, that the USA is a dream state. A 5-year dream, 5 years of American comfort, of sleep. Wouldn't it be nice to? We sustained that dream state in Addis behind stone walls. Everyone had them. It was the norm. The runway between golf course and movie theater, Huey's and the Lockheed C-130 Hercules. Crossing it once, we were accosted by a parcel of rambunctious Ethiopian lads who cornered me, leaving my sister alone off to the side, some of them pushing me, one slugging me in the face or head area, or was that at Lesher Junior High School in Fort Collins. My sister then shouting at them to leave her brother alone as we scooted off across the tarmac to the youth center adjacent to the movie house, my heart pounding in my sister's hand. And this is just, I'll just finish off with these last few pages. She died a couple months ago. And this is for my sister, actually. This poem, this Radio Ethiopia. She died a couple months ago. I have the day written down in one of the 2 notebooks she sent me for Christmas. I couldn't help but see it as symbolic, some larger aspect beneath it all. That the day she died was on the last page of my book, one of the 2 notebooks she gave me for Christmas, a present. I was pleased by her gift when I opened it, thinking how well she knew me to have chosen those 2 notebooks, the style of them. But I didn't know at the time that the time it would take me to fill both of them with my writing would be the one time she had left to live. Of course, this thought troubled me and disgusted me at the same time. But unlike that day with my brother died, when I fled the office not knowing where to go, and so just walking, heading north on Lexington, weaving through pedestrians on Lexington, up and over to Central Park, where the sky cracked open and so forth. Unlike that day, I allowed myself to linger in the thought, to inscribe that day in the notebook, and then, now, write it here. For over 30 years now, you've been meaning. Early on, you were alerted to the treasure trove before you, the trove, the treasure for the taking, extractive as such. Nietzsche, etc., shame, etc., poets, etc. Didn't want to write it as it inevitably leads to family life. His entire life, practically. That's family. a shield for empire. I did not want to say, nor did I really say, that's what you're saying, right? No. Hate confrontations. Don't like to disappoint. Want them to like me. Let's get along. Why we were there, etc. His career, base, etc. And then went down to superstructure, etc. Embedded, making do. But what's there to write about? And how? What form? From what vantage point? Just daily things. Here, there is like anywhere. Brazil flying over Rio. Poverty as heat waves. The gut, those shacks flapping in the breakers. Some kind of tinny connectivity. White guilt is imperial guilt. It's all about you and your whiteness. So shut up, I don't have any paper. We don't want any. People forget, go away. It never happened. Nothing ever happened. Even while it was happening, it wasn't happening. It didn't matter. It was of no interest. Harold Pinter. Becky's house full of Africa, still breathing on the walls, hope full of Africa. Lesotho, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and some other countries, planes, mapping missions, Peace Corps, NGOs, humanitarians, a dream about Ethiopia. Strange but fascinating buildings, fear of heights on a tall stair, threat in the air, losing sight of parents at Funhouse. We're in San Francisco now. Lindsay Hill's Eyes, etc. Question Mark Hill, the poetry scene in Portland, Abel, Larkin, Yeary. How Becky lived Ethiopia, or the idea of it we have here. Her thrift, her selflessness, people making her a saint, what they used to call a living saint, death, a sealant, her humility, her gentleness, her patience, my sister. Thanks.